everyone, welcome to Read, Write, Create. My name is Katya and this month I've mostly been reading Korean fiction. Starting off with a book by Lisa C., who is an American author who's delved into her own history, her own ancestry, led her on the path to becoming a well-known historical fiction author. Her novel, The Island of Sea Women, is a well-researched book about Jeju Island and the Haenyeo. Now, Lisa C. visited the places that she wrote about, listened to the stories of various people who remembered the period of time covered in this novel, and then weaved together all of the information, all the stories and the history to create a thoroughly absorbing story. Haenyeo is the Korean name for the sea women who carefully harvest the food offered by the sea, mindfully diving in a pattern that allows production and restoration. Now, Jeju Island is located south of mainland Korea, and when the book starts in the 1930s, we find a family of Haenyeo living under ongoing Japanese colonization. And it shows how these collectives of women ensured that they worked together to safeguard one another in the sea as well as outside of the sea, because there was that constant threat of the soldiers' presence. They also worked in a way that was respectful of each other's locations on the island, so one collective on the island wouldn't dive in the seas or the waters of another collective. They did the most dangerous, most physically strenuous work for all of their family, and began their training really young, learning to develop their lung capacity and developing their muscles and honing their senses so that they were properly able to assess the risks that they'd have to take when they have to decide whether to harvest something or to leave it well alone. So whether that's tackling an octopus or trying to pry off an abalone, it was fascinating to read about. The world building is superb, and it covers Japanese colonization in the 1930s, the Second World War, the Cold War, the economic reformation in the 1970s, and on into the age of cell phones. The story moves back and forth in time with our narrator Young-suk, a great-grandmother, reminiscing about when she was young and all she gained and lost in her lifetime. Now, Young-suk first meets her heart friend, Mija, when they're 7 years old, and they are closer than sisters at the start, and they are trained by the other Haenyeo in diving, especially by Young-suk's mother, the leader of their local collective. Their talent in their teens then leads them on to further adventures, especially because they have the desire to support themselves and their families. So they end up also traveling with other Haenyeo across different nations and into different nations' waters, including Russia. So I found that fascinating to read about. They were fiercely independent women who were brought up in a semi-matriarchal society. Now, through Young-suk, we experience the friends maturing and having their own families. But as we go back and forth in the 70 years of remembrance, there's a mystery that surrounds the relationship between Young-suk and Mija. Now, I was prepared for scenes of violence, given that we'd cover colonization, war, and the Cold War. But even so, I found a scene 3/4 of the way into the book really harrowing. It didn't put me off reading the book. I did pause afterwards to, absorb, regroup, but it didn't put me off the book. I don't think the violence was gratuitous, and I think if a reader was, only expecting a story about the ups and downs of friendship between two women, then they might be shocked by it. But given the time period, I don't think that we should, as readers, be surprised to find a scene like that. I still was a little bit. Like I say, I was expecting it, but it still can affect you. So I'd say there's a bit of a trigger warning there for anything you can think about in terms of war atrocities. The book is well researched, detailed, and definitely doesn't shy away from deeply disturbing details of history. Now, the people of Jeju were time and time again subjected to the interests of others because of the strategic military location of the island. Now today it is a well-known tourist destination, and in the not distant past, not so much. It was all about military strategy, and the poor residents lived in fear, struggled against poverty, restrictions, surveillance, random acts of violence. A number of the characters in the book show amazing resilience, but some do falter because they are very human characters. Some show unbelievable understanding, compassion, and capacity for forgiveness, and others don't. And on reflection, I realized just how many themes and angles are covered by this book. And yet as a reader, I didn't notice this aspect because I was just immersed in the world and in the characters. Everything unfolded really naturally, and it made me feel so emotional as well. The last time I had a full-on cry about a book was when I, at the start of the year, read No Fixed Abode about homelessness in the UK. Now, this book affected me as well. Everything unfolded naturally, and it made me feel emotional afterwards. But throughout the story, there is a thread of hope that the reader can hold on to. If you do read it, then it's quite possible that some scenes will make you pause and take time to adjust to what's just happened before you move on with the story. I'd highly recommend this read. And if you've already read The Island of Sea Women, do let me know what you thought. And let me know if it's actually on your TBR, on your reading list for the future. Other books set on Jeju Island that are on my radar include White Chrysanthemum and Stonehouse on Jeju Island, Improvising Life Under a Healing Moon, which is literary non-fiction. When it comes to films set on Jeju Island, I have watched Night in Paradise, which, despite its name, is a very gritty mobster revenge story with lots of blood and gore. The whole film is shot with a cold grey-blue filter that makes the viewer feel almost in tune with the depression or the coldness of many of the characters in this story. If lots of stabbings, shootings, and other creative ways to maim and murder are not your thing, then perhaps you'd like to look at Warm and Cozy instead, because this is a rom-com set on the island, and it is by the Hong sisters, put together as a twist on the ant and the grasshopper fable. And you've got the ant being all very hardworking is the female character who ends up on the island trying to set up her own cafe, whereas you've already got the grasshopper who's all set up on the island with his own business, very wealthy, very laid back, and very not her cup of tea. So it is a slow romance, slow burn. Probably worth me mentioning that Night in Paradise is a film, so that's about 2 hours, whereas Warm and Cozy is going to be 16 episodes. Each episode is roughly 45 to 60 minutes long, so far more viewing time in the comedy. And finally, in my exploration of Jeju Island, and as a treat to myself for barely leaving a 20-mile radius from my hometown in nearly 2 years, I decided to get a mini virtual experience of the island via Etsy. So I ordered my first SeoulBox Life. If people are familiar with original SeoulBox and SeoulBox Signature, those are usually filled with Korean snacks and a couple of K-beauty and K-pop items. Their Life box is focused on particular areas, so this is the first one they've done, and it was concentrated on the area of Jeju Island, which was ideal for me. But as I discovered on receipt of the box, it does actually still include K-pop items, and that means I think that whichever box you choose from SeoulBox, it's going to be quite a treat for a BTS fan, because there's always going to be some BTS merch in it. I haven't been sponsored to talk about SeoulBox, but I will go on to do an unboxing, so let me know what you think of it. Let me also know in the comments if you'd like to buddy read any of the following books with me that I will be reading in the next few weeks. So the first one is The Silence of Bones, which is set in the Joseon era in the 1800s. I'll be reading this book between the 18th and the 24th of October. And the next book is In Order to Live. A North Korean Girl's Journey to Freedom, which I'll be reading between the 25th and the 31st of October. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care. Bye.